Welcome to another episode of the Pedestrian podcast as we make our way through an off season, which may just be the longest off season in history if things go one one path. Join myself, Stuart Court, on this week's Pedestrian podcast is, as always, Mr. Adam Nathan. How are we, sir?
I'm good. Finally, a relaxing month of no English football. My wife is delighted. She can't believe there's more games and that there's more games to come. She declared last week that she thought sports were over, full stop. But little does she know, we're making a comeback. So hopefully there'll be plenty more to talk about.
I mean, it's like it's on for like 17 days. Is it tomorrow?
It will never stop. Never stop.
And joining ourselves it's been a pretty strong off-season of Seattle sporting luminaries. We've had Mina Kimes, Cliff Averill, and joining that party is Mr. Danny O'Neill. Welcome to Pedestrian Podcast, Danny.
Well, I appreciate you having me. I certainly pale in comparison to Mina and to Cliff. So
we didn't want to say that, but you're going to say it.
It's definitely true. It's definitely true.
So, obviously you work in Seattle sports, the media. You were with the Seattle Times. You were with before 710, wasn't it?
Yeah. I've kind of bounced around. I worked at the Seattle Times three different stops, and from 2006 through 2013, I covered the Seahawks full time. Prior to that, I'd been with the Seattle PI, and I covered the Seahawks for 1 year at the PI, and before that was the Sonics. And then since 2013, I've worked at 710 ESPN Seattle, which has been kind of this happy accident. I never trained or prepared or expected to talk for a living, so it's been very fun.
Yeah. So obviously, this is kind of 2020 encapsulated. We're on using a service which no one really seemed to be aware of before February, and you're doing your radio show 4 or 5 days a week from across the country in New York. How's the COVID world been for you and yours?
It's for me, my wife and I, we live here in Manhattan. We moved in September, or I moved in September. She had gotten a job here in New York City. We don't have kids, so we've been pretty fortunate. We live in a pretty comfortable apartment, and we've both been healthy. It was strange to watch how the pandemic hit here. We live on the same block as a hospital, so you saw different preparations that were taken, and there were refrigerator trailer trucks, sort of that you could see out our window, they were makeshift morgues. And those were there for a couple months, but I don't know what it's been like in England. I think that the sort of the tragedies happen behind closed doors. It's happened in hospitals, and it's been with people that haven't been able to be with loved ones. I certainly feel very fortunate, personally, and very sad too, to kind of watch this sort of unprecedented year as we all wrestle with all of these different things and trying to keep each other safe.
Yeah, I mean, I think we spoke. New York kind of had it first, didn't it? So they kind of got prepared quicker than anyone else. So it's kind of you were seeing it before anyone else in the country, especially over your side of the Atlantic.
Yeah, and now kind of watching to see, okay, what's going to happen, because the transmission rate has gone way down and infections have dropped, and it hasn't disappeared, but we're not in that crisis where, I mean, really for a couple of weeks, the fear and the reality was that the healthcare system was becoming overloaded, and it's certainly at a manageable level now, but we're kind of all watching. You don't quite know when or if another wave will happen and how that will impact us.
Yeah. Adam?
How's it gone in terms of, on a work life? I mean, I'm a caterer, I'm an event caterer. We do 200-person functions on a regular basis, and all of a sudden, that feels like a different life ago, and now we're doing takeaway boxes, and you have an incredibly social job. I imagine you're very used to people into the studios, a lot of face-to-face work. How's that impacted kind of how you do your job? I mean, for me, it feels like I can't remember my old life, and this feels so normal now, which is almost, you want this to feel like a different thing. But how's it feel for you guys in the media?
I'm a pretty extreme extrovert. So that it's been a real challenge to not be around people. I miss the office. I miss being around people. As far as the conversations and the content, I'm very fortunate to continue working. to be in the media and to be at a company that, knock on wood, we haven't had layoffs. But it's also strange to kind of feel like there were times that you were making up conversation about sports because sports wasn't happening. So you get this, and I went through different phases of that, of we're doing something that kind of doesn't matter, but then feeling like, oh, actually it does matter because we're all overwhelmed with outlets to talk about sort of the severity of what's going on. And sports is kind of a tie, and why I've always been drawn to sports is it's a tie that lashes a community together. It's something that does bring people together. To not have that, and then to feel when sports do come back in at least a limited extent, or even when there was NFL news, to have something to actually talk about, you could actually feel the energy come back to the conversation. And that in some ways just kind of made you realize how much of the energy of contact and interaction and conversation that we're missing. It does feel different, and it's hard to imagine what it was like before.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the first real American sport thing which happened during all this was the NFL draft, which obviously went down pretty universally, well praised from even Roger Goodell, copped some praise, which is obviously a rarity. But then, I mean, that's like 5 months ago, and we're still in the same situation now. It's a question of what kind of season we're going to watch in 6-7 weeks. Well, without getting too deep, how do you think the league are handling it or have handled it thus far? Obviously, teams are back on fields and in camps and in buildings.
So far, so good. I do believe that the NFL was completely bailed out by the fact that their calendar gave them the most time. The results so far in Major League Baseball are not encouraging. There's 30 teams in Major League Baseball, and we've now had outbreaks among 2 of them. The Miami Marlins had, within the first week of play, had upward almost 20 people get sick, and where they've now not played for a full week. The St. Louis Cardinals are in the midst of an outbreak right now. I think 13 people, it's 7 players and 6 staff members. That's not encouraging, because I think baseball, you look at it, it's a socially it's a sport where it's possible to socially distance. You don't have that sort of immediate, and it's not like football, where the idea that if you played a baseball game against an opponent who was contagious, who had contracted coronavirus, whether they'd tested positive for it or not, you could see how you go through a game and you might not be infected by that person. It seems like it's much more problematic and difficult to separate or determine who came into contact with sick people in a football game. So I don't know what it's going to be like. I've been interested to watch, because it seems like Europe has been able to return. And I know that not all countries, like France, their top soccer league didn't return, but most European soccer clubs have returned, and it doesn't seem like there's been the rash of positive tests that we've experienced in the US.
No, and also over here, we've just had the first international cricket series. We had 3 games. The West Indies cricket team, about 25 of them flew from the Caribbean over here. They flew over when it was pretty much at the peak of it as well. So they're getting lauded all parts just for coming over. So that's like the first like test of everything going well. The players have been in bubbles at the stadiums for 10 days before the game as well. So it's everything's just kind of, they're learning from kind of going through a different process, aren't they?
Yeah. New Orleans, the Saints, that came out, they're clustering their team at a hotel. So they've rented out the entire hotel. There's no extra guests, and I think it's 150 people, players and staff members, that they have staying there. So it's not a bubble, but they're trying to insulate contact and prevent contact, which seems like that will have a better chance of working. Whereas in baseball, they're having the guys go home at night when they're at home, and so far there's some pretty alarming signs. I mean, the 2 teams have now had outbreaks that have gone through and spread within the clubhouses is concerning.
Obviously, I think Thursday is the final deadline for the NFL opt-out. I feel like CJ Mosley is probably the highest profile player who obviously just doesn't like playing for the Jets at all, because whether it's injury or opt-out, he just wants none of it. Fair play to him. I think he's going to play his 3rd game for them in 20,060. So good luck to the guy. is it, 48 hours when it's trade deadlines, when it's free agency, this is when, S starts to hit the fan and stuff starts to happen. Do you reckon there could be another raft? And at what point, I don't think the NFL are going to cancel the season, but what's going to resonate? If what's the level of, making waves that could happen in the next couple of days that could maybe alter the narrative slightly?
If you had a high profile quarterback opt out, or you saw a number of high-ranking players decide, I'm not going to do this. So far, I've heard from a couple of NFL people that they were surprised at the high number, and I actually kind of expected more. I thought we might get as high as 10%, and right now it looks like it's averaging about between 2 and 3 per team. We'll see. It's hard because I used to do anonymous surveys for Sporting News, and one of the questions that they would have would be sort of head injury questions. Are you concerned about the long-term impact of concussions? And that would be followed by a question about, have you ever hid symptoms of a concussion to continue playing? And I don't think I ever had a player tell me that they weren't concerned about the long-term effect of concussions. And the vast majority also said that they hid symptoms of a concussion to continue playing. I think football players in general have made concessions about their long-term health to play the game. So I didn't really have a gauge to expect how many guys would choose to sort of take on the risk of playing and getting sick. But it seems like some people have been very thoughtful about, I just don't want to do this right now. I'm not willing to do it. Starlo Tulele and Chance Warmack is the one Seahawk that had opted out. I certainly understand it. I can't stand the idea that people will react negatively towards someone who chooses to not put themselves at risk.
Yes, I think Marquise Goodwin come out and explained his stance. It's kind of like, you don't need to do that. You've made your decision. It's clearly something you've thought hard about. For someone who's, it's the only thing they've really ever done for their lives. So for them to make the decision to not want to do that for the next 6-7 months, you kind of just say, okay. But the fact that it has to be explained is kind of a telling of the current environment in some circles, isn't it?
Yeah, and I can't wrap my head around this, where people will accuse the player of being selfish for prioritizing their own health. And the reason that they're upset is because that player isn't performing for their entertainment, which is the most selfish thing that I can imagine. Like, it's this, but there is a mentality there that gets twisted. And look, I feel both fortunate and a little bit guilty, honestly, that I've been able to, for the most part, I can get groceries delivered to me. I can work from home. Like, for the day-to-day, it's impacted me, but not has it made my life measurably worse. Like, the biggest thing is that I haven't been able to be around people, and I feel fortunate for that. And if you have the comfort or the ability to not put yourself at risk, and you choose to take advantage of that, I don't get the idea of people begrudging them that. And one of the realities is that some of the players don't feel the same financial pinch that your average Joe does. And if they choose to keep themselves healthy, hey, all the power to you.
The NFL does a terrific job of, almost in a Pravda-esque way, of managing to, allow itself to be the swan floating perfectly across the water, and underneath the legs are pedaling like mad to try and hide any negative coverage. The concussion thing is an enormous thing, but they managed to kind of bury it, really, and let everyone get on with their Sundays and the kneeling, and I just want to watch my sport. I don't want politics. Do you think that there must be a level of slight concern amongst the owners that if, God forbid, a player was to die ultimately from this and it becomes rife, like, it doesn't feel like there's a massively thick sheet of ice on top of the NFL's general PR campaign, keeping it as like America's thing. And that must be a concern, because it doesn't feel like it's the most stable of things keeping the whole thing afloat.
I would agree with you. And I think that some of the things that you've seen the league do, and the way that they responded to the players who released the video asking Goodell to say Black Lives Matter, among other things, and the fact that Goodell responded and did it, I think speaks to there are questions about how much of the players' interest does the league have, and is the commissioner just sort of the stuffed shirt that's up there to take all of the flack so the owners don't get criticized? There are very real questions about both how the game benefits and the long-term costs that it takes from the players. And look, there's a certain level of that people have been willing to accept the harm that football players have inflicted on them because it's our Sunday gladiator sport. And yeah, I would agree with you, Adam. Like the question of at what point would there be some sort of a fundamental change?
Mm-hmm.
I certainly, I've wondered for years what would happen if a player died on the field. Like that's not outside the realm of possibility. And what would happen?
Myles Garrett was 3 inches away from killing someone.
Yeah, and that dude got an extension this offseason. Like those sort of things. Exactly. Like I don't know how people would react. I don't know how that would change the popularity of the sport.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with that video, I think as soon as people saw Patrick Mahomes' face pop up on it, you're like, oh, okay. This if any video is going to be the one which changes something, him being on the video, Super Bowl MVP, about to be the $1 billion man or whatever it was, his contract. That was kind of the moment, wasn't it? Where I think, yeah, if anything's going to change, this is the thing that's going to be the change, isn't it? Wasn't it?
I thought so. But then I also wondered, man, like the NFL has been how they handled the questions about Kaepernick and what basically in which they just moved everything out of sight. Like the NFL succeeded in as Trump targeted the players and then all of the players were really upset. They were able to get people to stop watching. And some of that was by having the television networks not show the anthem anymore. Some of it was moving and having the players who continued to protest or to sit during the anthem. Those players were in the locker room then. They didn't come out until afterward. I thought it was, and I don't think Goodell had unanimous support in addressing it, but without a doubt, having Patrick Mahomes as sort of the face of it. Not only that, but I think everybody wondered, when you're a quarterback, you get kind of close to being management. Like it's not, you're not fully a rank and file player anymore, because there is a level of that, and both with he and Russell Wilson. And that's not to say that those guys are necessarily not political, or Aaron Rodgers and all of the different players that have been in there. Having Patrick Mahomes as part of that was and did make an impact.
Yeah.
Firstly, you can tell you were working the media on Zoom for a while, because the way you just muted your microphone. Because
I got a dog going nuts.
I know.
We got pizza coming. She gets excited for pizza.
You timed it so perfectly to unmute with your microphone. You can tell it's not your first time doing one of these. And secondly,
not the first time my dog barking either.
I
She's
figured.
excited.
And secondly, it's funny because to bring it to a slightly Seahawks perspective, I remember Pete Carroll talking about the Tennessee game in Nashville when I think Trump had just said one of his many outrageous things. And I don't blame Pete Carroll for this, but the phrasing he used, he was almost it's not his job necessarily to be so pastoral. These are professional guys, they're not college kids. But the way in which he was talking about that game, like how they didn't do a good job, he was kind of framing it in the sense that we lost because our players were distracted by kind of some of the social context issues. And I wonder how contemporary that view might be now, how that would be looked at when players are much more outspoken. And I think a coach like Pete, who is clearly a tremendous human being and wonderful for his players, but his job is to win games ultimately. And you could tell there was a frustration about that. If we didn't have to do all the protesting and all the conversations, we could have had another special teams meeting that evening. That's kind of how it felt to me. And I wonder if that may be a change a few years down the road after the players have been a bit more publicly outspoken.
Yeah, it's interesting because Pete really does empathize and believe in the message and the mission of social justice. Like it is something, like his heart is there, and he does feel that. I think that his reaction after that Tennessee game was the belief that his players had expended so much emotion in talking about what they were going to do before the game that they didn't have as much. It's an emotional team. Like Pete Carroll's teams are emotional, and I think that they were not flat, but they had already expended a great deal of emotion that weekend in the conversation with it. I don't know what it's going to be like going forward. I think Pete also honestly regrets how things went with Kaepernick. I think if he had that to do over again, he might look at signing Kaepernick to be a backup. When they first looked at him, I think a large part of the reason that they didn't is the spot that Russell was at that point in his career, that they didn't want to bring in someone who would necessarily be seen as a competitor. And there was a little bit of tension between Russ and some of the guys on the defense, kind of namely Sherman. But it's a good question. Pete does not shy away from letting his players be themselves and express themselves. And how that comes and how that happens now in a different reality will be interesting, because I would say that Pete was the outlier 5 years ago, and he's not necessarily now. I think more and more teams and coaches and people around the league do sort of accept isn't the right word, but believe that it's a good thing for players to exercise their voices.
But obviously back then was, like you say, it's a bit of a powder keg. But also another aspect of this over the last few months was the Russell Wilson presser on Zoom a few weeks ago. And I think I text Michael Sean Dugar, who covers the team for Athletic. I texted him, I was like, I've never seen Russell Wilson not Russell Wilson kind of thing. It was the most raw 40 minutes. So that, I mean, what's happened in the past few months, not just with COVID, obviously he's got a newborn, and obviously George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movements and what it's more than likely changed his perspective and how he conducts himself as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And look, there's still a reality of that it's different to be a black quarterback in the NFL. Like you can talk about the success that black quarterbacks have had, but there's a different evaluation scale that is used for a black quarterback. I don't have any question or doubts about that. Just look at what happened to Cam Newton this offseason. I mean, that guy's still pretty young. He's not too long ago an elite franchise. He was the MVP of the league in 2016. So I give Russell, and I think Russell is it's not wrestling with it because he's always been a black quarterback. But how do you speak for the things that you feel strongly about when you've not spoken about those issues publicly? It hasn't been part of your messaging. And I think that I would agree with you, Stu. Like hearing he talked about a pain that he has never really talked about before. And it was very human and it was very vulnerable. And that's one thing Russell has not ever been. And I think it's part of the reason why he's so successful. He doesn't talk about being a short quarterback and not getting opportunities in that same way. It's kind of like somebody's overlooked me. And there was a heaviness to what he said. And it was different. He doesn't talk like that. That's not part of his approach to being a public figure. And I think in that way, he was letting us into the very private challenges and the toll that has taken on him.
Yeah. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, do you think he ever might, he's never going to regret his career. He's been a tremendous leader and ambassador, but if he carries on as, per that interview, as opposed to the robot that we've come to, you can't even love it. You have to tolerate it because there's nothing to love. He's it's just like a tin man talking. Do you think he might ever live to regret the fact that he decided not to be a bit more kind of not emotional, maybe emotive at the podium and be a bit more human? Because really, like, that's what as consumers we love. We love that. Like, you don't need to be controversial, but you can be human.
I don't think he'll regret it. Mm-hmm. I think that a big part of Russell's approach is he talks about having a neutral mind, and he works with a mental coach, Trevor Moawad, And a big part of Russell's approach is going back to center after every play, whether it's good or bad, getting back to a place where he's non-emotive in some senses. That it's not like, oh, I'm hot, man, I'm going to keep dealing. And it's not like, God, I've got to get out of this. It's getting back to this neutral place. And I believe that his public persona, the press conferences, are part of that practice. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of how he helps to do that. And I also think that long term, I think Russell's goals could relate to politics. He idolizes Derek Jeter. So does he want to be the face of a franchise? I think he sees that it's not a poker face, because he's not concealing what he feels. Like, he's actively trying to not feel it in some ways, right? Like, and he sees that as part of the discipline. So I think that he sees a value in being able to take whatever emotional extreme he's feeling and sort of dialing back the intensity and getting back to a neutral space. It's certainly possible, Adam, that he could get to a point in his career and he's like, I wish I'd cut it loose and had a little bit more fun, or I had just been out there. But I don't know. He's got an approach that, and I think that approach is part of what he would credit to his success.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, over the few months from the draft until recently, really, I know Adam was rather negative, and then we kind of were jolted into life with what the team did about 10 days ago, and I did Jamal Adams, and I messaged Adam a couple of days ago and said, for me, this Seahawks off-season and anything this Seahawks team does is pre-Jamal and post-Jamal. Is that something you agree with? Like, the whole feel of everything is changed just by that one Adam Schefter tweet, and then the Ian Rappaport one Adam 15 seconds later.
3 seconds later. Always 3 seconds later. I feel so sorry for the poor guy.
Do you guys think they're on the same text chain? Like, that's, I've started to wonder, like, is it is it a group text that goes out? Like, because it's clear that, like, that's not how information would flow, right? That one guy gets it just seconds before the other one does. Yeah. So I don't know if it's Schefter's thumbs. Like, I would be fascinated to know, like, actually how, or is it that Schefter gets the first copy tweet and then that same source like copies the text and sends it to Rappaport, if there's like an actual pecking order in it? Yeah, it's
maybe Schefter is the one giving Rappaport the news and he's tweeting it out at the same time as he's texting Rappaport, who then, the damage is done by that stage.
It's such a funny economy. Like, it's that part of it. Oh, it cracks me up. I do think that I will see this season differently as soon as they made the move for Jamal. And it's part how good Jamal is, but it's also that it's the first time that in John Schneider and Pete Carroll's tenure that they've made a move where I'm like, this better work. And they've made aggressive moves before, but they've always had Pro Bowlers coming out their ears when they've done it. Like, when they traded for Percy Harvin and paid him, you had Russell Wilson was going into his second year, and you kind of knew that you had your quarterback, and let's fire it up and let's go. With Jimmy Graham, they were coming off of back-to-back Super Bowl appearances. This is a bit of a different spot, because I see it that they've kind of been at the same point for about 5 years, where good enough to get into the playoffs, maybe even win a playoff game, but really, really not contending for home field advantage, like not really for a first week bye, and then getting just whooped on the road in the divisional round. And in that time, they've gone from being sort of a team that was riding the nucleus that had taken them to the 2 Super Bowls to a team that had turned over their roster. And I don't know if the group that they have, the question of whether they have the talent to get back over the hump and become one of the favorites in the NFC, I don't know. But certainly the move for Jamal Adams is the kind of thing you only do that if you think he puts you over the top.
But also, compared to Harvin and Jimmy Graham, the whole feel around Jamal is completely different. Obviously, Harvin was kind of coming with a little bit of baggage. Jimmy Graham was still pissed pissed that the Saints didn't pay him as a receiver or tag him as a receiver. But Jamal, I mean, his press conference last week was unbelievable. He legitimately seems as happy as a person can be to go in the opposite way to where you went last September, Danny. He's gone over from New Jersey over to Seattle. I don't think I've ever seen anyone so like there was everything was positive and looking forward and not looking back. It was impressive, but it was different to the other two big time moves they made, wasn't it?
Yes. It's clearly like he got what he wanted, and he's in a spot that he feels better about, and he knows he's going to get paid. If not this year, then, and it probably won't be this year, it'll be next year. I think the question comes down is, can a safety be worth that? Like they paid. We've seen 3 trades, right, where players like elite caliber players have been moved for 2 first-round picks: Khalil Mack, Laramie Tunsil, Jalen Ramsey, and now Jamal Adams. The difference is Adams plays safety, which would be the least valuable of all of those positions, but safeties have excelled under Pete Carroll. And so it makes it fascinating. And there's part of me that likes, if you ask me, do I think it's worth it? No, I don't think 2 first-round picks for a safety. I think it's not a deal that I would make. I wouldn't do that for the right to make him the highest paid safety in the league. On the flip side, now that John Schneider's done it, I feel like the kid whose dad just tricked him into getting on the roller coaster, where I'm like, okay, let's do it. This is going to be a blast. Like I'm really excited to see how it comes out, because look, if he is that guy and that defense gets back, or even he doesn't need to make them great. He just needs to make them average.
Yeah. Also with Khalil and Jalen, Jamal's coming in with all that trade cost, but also he's coming to a team who has a quarterback.
Yes, 100%. Huge difference. Yes,
yeah.
The most solid quarterback situation out of all of those.
Yeah.
Tunsil, Deshaun Watson, it's not like he's close, but he's a franchise quarterback, and Tunsil's the left tackle, and Tunsil's probably the worst football player out of the 4 of those guys. Like, even though he plays an important position, he's probably is he a Pro Bowler? Like, whereas Jamal's clearly, I mean, Jamal's one of the 2 or 3 best safeties in the league.
Yeah.
So I'm really pleased that this is how the conversation was phrased, because exactly the point I kind of wanted to make. So social media is as reductive a place as you can possibly find, and Twitter is the most reductive of a reductive society. And the Let Russ Cook crowd are one that I don't necessarily disagree with, but obviously they minimalize kind of the point. Now, in the trades that the Seahawks have made in the past, Jimmy Graham, Percy Harvin, I'd even say Sheldon Richardson, Jadeveon Clowney, all have, at the time, when they've signed, we've thought, oh my goodness, this guy is going to be so good at doing that for the team. And invariably, they've not been allowed to cook, without wanting to use that word. I mean, Sheldon Richardson was coming in as like just let him free and do what he wants. Same with Clowney. Jimmy Graham was asked to block so many times for the team for absolutely no reason. That's not what he does. Let him do what he does. And when you say Jamal Adams has to work, I don't think it's going to work if he's not allowed to be Jamal Adams. But that would take an enormous shift from Pete Carroll, kind of letting a guy, especially in his main position, in the secondary, to kind of do what he wants to do. How likely is it that Pete kind of lets him do that and doesn't constrain him? Because I don't see a safety in Seattle getting 6.5 sacks, but to be worth 2 first-round picks, you probably need to get close to that.
He needs to either pressure the quarterback or he needs to get interceptions. Yeah. He needs to force turnovers. I'm more optimistic about it with Jamal Adams because he is a member of the secondary, and because we've seen Pete do it. We've seen Pete use Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor. Bill Barnwell had a heat map where Jamal Adams lined up last season, and he compared it to where Cam Chancellor lined up in 2016. And they weren't identical, but there were enough similarities where you saw where they were. Jamal was a little more heavy on one side of the line where Cam was on both sides of the line, but there were enough similarities that I looked at it and I was like, okay, you can see that if that's the template for how they're going to use him. And he's not as big. Adams isn't as big as Chancellor was, but that kind of question, and Pete did that with Earl. Like, he played to Earl's strengths. They played a lot of single high because of Earl's range. And Pete, while his his patience for freelancing or reacting to what they see isn't endless. Like, he does give his DBs latitude. I'm more optimistic about that. I completely agree with you. I thought Jimmy Graham, I don't think the trade for Jimmy Graham was nearly as bad as most people do. He's a really productive player.
You definitely get agreement with us. We both love Jimmy Graham.
Yeah.
But the idea that you're going to have him block, like, there were times where I was like, okay, why did you do that? Like, why did you trade for him if you're going to have your sports car tow a boat? Because you can get a guy to tow the boat, and it's not nearly as hard as finding a guy that's a receiver like Jimmy Graham. I'm more optimistic about this working because I do think that Pete has gone away from – he's really good friends with Monty Kiffin. And, I mean, they go back to, like, the beginning of Pete's college as an assistant coach. And Monty's, like, the dean of the cover two, like the Tampa 2 defense. Pete's more flexible with the format of what he does. And it's kind of – he's not devoted to his scheme as much as he is devoted to having a relatively simple approach that frees his players up to play fast and aggressive.
Yeah. You've talked with Pete, his relationship he has with his players. I think I've heard a few different examples of how he does that. But obviously, you've been in the media for this entire time in Seattle. Before we go through quickly all those times, what was that? We talked to jolt with Jamal. What was that jolt like from Jim Mora to Pete Carroll 11, 12 years ago? I mean, you could not really get to people with different outlooks on life, really, could you?
No, it was very different. Jim was, and I always feel like I need to preface it where I like Jim, and I think Jim is very honest, and that's, as a reporter, I mean, that's the thing that you ask for and would want the most. I think he was put in a very tough spot where he came in as the handpicked option that the GM wanted in place of Holmgren. And he stepped into a situation in which the GM was, and Tim Ruskell, was really at the sort of end of his rope in a make or break year. I think it was really hard. Watching Pete come in and how he sort of reset everything, it was really healthy for the organization to be able to get back to having a GM and a coach that were kind of on the same path. They hadn't had that since Holmgren first came. When Holmgren came as the coach and the GM. And then after the 2002 season, where Holmgren was still the coach, but he wasn't the GM anymore. And he didn't really like the fact that he wasn't the GM anymore. And then they go to the Super Bowl in 2005 with the new GM. And that kind of suddenly fairly quickly gets out of line. I thought it was really healthy. And Jim is someone who he will push and push and push on players. And Pete is not someone, he believes that there's a limit when you coach negatively, when you coach through anger or through fear, that there's a limit to what that player will end up doing for you, that they'll basically play hard enough to not get fired. And Pete believes that if you get a guy to believe that you believe in him, that you will get more from him that way. And I think that you see the evidence of that. Pete's been really good and at his best coaching guys that in other situations would be uncoachable or difficult, and he gets a lot out of them. It also makes it so you get a little bit more turbulence, because when you empower players like that and get them to believe in themselves, it's a little harder to tell them, like, hey, chill out and you need to take a back seat right now. But the biggest thing is you had a culture reset where everybody was on the same page again. And that hadn't been the case for about 8 years with Seattle.
Did you see anything change after in Pete's, maybe not demeanor, but how he maybe approached players after Malcolm Butler?
No. It's interesting. I do think that they dealt with, and it's interesting to go back to that interception, because one of the guys that I remember, Michael Bennett, in the locker room after that game, I heard from several people, made a very passionate plea that the players needed to stick together and that they needed to stand up for the coaches, because the coaches were going to take a lot of crap. And there was this very passionate plea that part of, like, us being together and being part of a team means we stay together and we stand up together. So I don't think he had a situation where everybody was angry at him, but it stewed in the background for a number of years. And we saw flashes of it, right, with Sherman on that Thursday night game against the Rams when he was mad about the pass being thrown down there. And there's no doubt that hung in the background. But I think Pete prides himself on being able to not have that incident sort of make him question himself. The one question I do have is whether they changed the profile of players that they went after. Did they start getting guys who were a little less tumultuous?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, right? Like and I don't know if that's just sort of the nature of they got a different group of guys that they didn't set out to like, oh, let's go get some guys who are a handful. But I mean, you had Doug Baldwin, Richard Sherman, Michael Bennett, Marshawn Lynch. Like you had a pretty high number of guys, Percy Harvin. You had a high number of guys who were very willful players and combustible. And that has not been the case. And I don't think that's necessarily been to the benefit of the team. There's part of me that's wondered, like maybe part of what Pete's magic is that he's able to tolerate a lot more sort of turbulence than most people are. And you get the benefit of that too.
For me, the last few years kind of read on that sense that it's a bit like Pete wants to have his cake and eat it. You know, it's all well and good having the outspoken guys that will push you and tell the quarterback that he sucks when you get into Super Bowls. But then when it takes a slight downturn, like, I can't possibly have this around. You know, this isn't this. You know, we have to get rid of the whole thing. And right now, I actually think, and you know, if we're going to do AD and BC, you know, with the pre and post Jamal Adams signing, Jamal might be, you know, the way back to that, to get a guy. You know, it's quite a nice group of guys at the moment. There doesn't have to be an enormous amount of kind of challenging going on. You know, Tyler Lockett is not Doug Baldwin when it comes to his outspoken nature. Bobby and KJ are known for their kind of quiet leadership, and I kind of miss it. I have to say, I think Stuart's the same. I miss the guys because they felt like a real representation of just being badasses on the field, and that's why we won.
I absolutely loved Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it was watching and listening to Richard Sherman for 15, 20 minutes. Just like it was pretty close to as like mundane as they probably are for the players to get through. It was box office more often than not, and obviously him and Doug started having fun with it. What was it like being in that room, and especially with Richard Sherman, especially who was a fifth-round cornerback, kind of forgotten on draft weekend to one of the faces of the franchise? How his emergence, what was that like to watch from your vantage?
It was awesome. Richard is one of the more unique. He's got a unique perspective on sort of both how he's gotten to where he is, what keeps him sharp. He's fascinating. And like I said, like what's the thing that a reporter would like most? It's someone who's honest. And Richard was willing to tell you what he thought or to share his perspective in ways that were, I remember the first time that I really saw it was they had Chris Herron, who is he's an American basketball player. He played a little bit in the NBA, but he's most known for he was a really prominent New England prep recruit who ended up having a significant number of drug problems. And he's gotten sober and he's remade himself as kind of a motivational speaker and someone who talks about what he went through. And they brought him in. And I remember talking to Richard about it afterward, because I've always been kind of fascinated in Herron. He'd gone to Fresno State, and I'd followed his career, and I've watched a couple of documentaries. So I was fascinated to hear from what the players thought about it. And Richard was annoyed, where he was kind of like, you got this guy up there telling me that I could fall victim to drugs at any point in time. He's like, don't question my mental toughness. Like I walked out of across people who were passed out every morning to go to high school. Like if I wanted the easy way out, I would have took it. Like don't sit there and tell me that can happen to me. And it was unexpected, but it was also like where I'm like, I'm getting an insight into this guy's personality and why he's been able to achieve at this level. Richard is the most interesting athlete that I've ever covered. And I say that he's got me blocked on Twitter right now, and has, because he didn't like some of the opinions I had about what happened after the confrontation with the Rams, and he's had whatever you want to say, a testy. I don't think it's cool, some of the stuff that he's thought that he's felt about Russell and some of that things that have happened. But I really respect both who Richard is and his willingness to kind of let us see inside of that. And I think Richard's always got a point. Like, I don't think he's always right. And I think he'll always argue to the end, convinced that he's right. But he always has a point. And I would say that goes for all the guys. Marshawn, who didn't like to be interviewed, certainly after the first couple years, fascinating person as well. And a guy opting out of the NFL's publicity machinery, I had a ton of respect for that. Like, he just didn't want to do it. It was like, I've been through this. I see what I get out of it. I see what the NFL gets out of it. And I also see like how it can end up kind of biting me in the butt, because I get a lot of guys who don't really understand me then passing judgment on me and who I am. I just rather not do it. A ton of respect. It's a fascinating team, and I have incredibly fond memories of covering that group of guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime Sherman does anything, I think Adam, I'm always on Twitter or in our messages just using the crown emoji, because for me, he will always be the king. He's just the king. Like, I don't think there'll be anyone who is my favorite player as much as even though even the team he plays for, we're supposed to dislike watching him do well for. It was yeah, he's the king basically. I think, Adam.
Yeah, I think him and Baldwin. I mean, I think I'm a year older than both of them, but I would very happily call to it like kind of like hero status. Like, I find them truly inspirational figures. I mean, neither Stuart and I can in any way relate remotely to their upbringing. It's just not anything like what we've had. And to watch people come with that kind of insight and thought, and be willing to be so independent with their thought. And I actually think it's a real shame that Doug Baldwin isn't sharing as much as maybe he otherwise could have done. I fully respect the fact that he's looking to get rid of that tag as a football player. But I think the world will be a weaker place if we don't hear from Doug Baldwin anymore.
Yeah,
I definitely think we'll hear from Doug more in the future. He's got a lot of things to say, and I would agree. I'm older than both of those dudes. I love hearing their perspective, and I think I'm a better person, and it's challenged me in a lot of ways to have covered them.
Another thing on relationships, and he's certainly not a player who, as you blocked on Twitter, I think he's the only Seahawk player who follows me last time I checked. He's come back this season. Bruce Irvin and McDonald.
I love Bruce.
So how did the McDonald's thing? And I mean, Bruce is one of those who's just like, he's as outgoing as outgoing. He's always got that big toothy grin on his face as well. I mean, he must be, obviously he doesn't get the stage time that the Shermans and Bennett's and Thomas got back in the day, but he's someone who's equally had an incredibly interesting journey to where he was in 2012 and now where he is again in 2020.
It's amazing. I sit there, his career makes me smile. Like, I'm so happy that guy, because you remember when they drafted him, the kind of thought was like, how is this going to work? Like, this is a person that he basically didn't play high school football because he was never eligible. He didn't graduate from high school. He was homeless for a time. He was selling drugs. And then he ended up kind of getting things together and going to a junior college and then going to West Virginia. And then he gets arrested after the combine, and everybody's like, what do you can you trust this knucklehead? And he's had a career in which he's done remarkably well. I'm not sure how. Bruce and I were talking, and I was asking him something, and maybe I think it might have started because he said something about that you guys always ask stuff for us, but you never ask stuff from us, but you never bring anything. And I was like, that's fair. Like, how about I bring you lunch tomorrow? And I think that's how it started. And there's really I love the fact that Bruce is just himself. And the things that would crack me up about him would be like, he would eat and burp while I was talking to him for different interviews. I think we did something called Loose Swervin' with Bruce Irvin. He was always funny. Like, just some of his pronunciations crack me up. And he's just himself. They were talking about who the best athlete in the locker room was, and it was coming. Deshaun Shedd was a decathlete. Like, so he's like a decathlete at Portland State. So, and people were saying it's him. And Bruce just looks over there and he goes, man, He goes, I'm 20 pounds heavier than you, and I can do everything better than you. It was like, just like, he might be right. Because I was convinced if you had a foot race, I think he and Earl would have been the two guys that I would have said that those guys might be the fastest off of those teams. And then he would just like, you ask him why Hauschka was so good at ping pong, because he's white. Like he was just funny. He's just got always something. After Percy Harvin, and I heard this, I didn't see it obviously because it was on the team plane. Percy Harvin got traded. Like they were going to St. Louis. He got pulled off the bus. They get to the team plane and the players are walking on. And how it works is the coaches are up front and then the players kind of walk on and get through the back. And Bruce just starts saying, so everybody's kind of shook of like, Percy's not going to be with us. What the hell just happened? They're realizing he got traded. And Bruce starts selling. He's like, Norton, nowhere cold. I'm just telling you, nowhere cold. Whenever you guys trade me and you ship me out of here, don't send me to Buffalo. Don't send me to New York. Nowhere cold. And everybody starts cracking up. And that's kind of just Bruce. Like he lets it all hang out there. And it does. It makes me so happy. He's got a couple of adorable kids. And he just couldn't be a nicer guy.
It was funny because Marshawn Lynch did that interview with Michael Silver on the NFL.com last week, and it was amazing to me because at the end he said, we had guys like, and when you hear a player from that era say that, well, you think they're going to say Earl Thomas, Bobby Wagner, Richard Sherman, Doug Baldwin, and I think he said Brandon Browner, Byron Maxwell, Brandon Mebane, and Red Bryant, and it kind of got me thinking like that. Just all 53 of them must have just been just a riot. And, I hope there's all the 30 for 30s and whatever that can be done about that team, because they seem like a remarkable group. And as a journalist, it must feel just, so, I don't want to say fortunate because you worked your arse off to get to where you were, but it must be just so great to have had, thank goodness I had, that period of 6-7 years where I got to cover those guys. And it must just feel incredibly just validating for your whole career.
It was really fun. The reality is, especially when working for a newspaper, by the time you get to an end of the season, like you're kind of worn out. And there's this weird thing that'll happen where you root for them to do well in the sense that the team's success provides more interest, which means people are more hungry for things that you're writing. But there's also this level of, as that happens, you're providing more and more, and it starts, I don't expect anybody to feel like, oh my, but you're kind of worn out and you're like, God, this is a lot. And at the end of that 2012 season, when they lost that game in Atlanta, it was the first time that I could physically feel like I was bummed. Like I was like, I'm not going to get to cover this group next week. And it wasn't the sort of fans' emotion of my team lost. It was like, this is so much fun, and that group is so fun to watch, and it set the table for that next season. Mm-hmm. I do feel incredibly fortunate to not just cover a team that was that good, but to cover a team that was that interesting and that different and that sort of unapologetically themselves. And it's something that I do. I feel incredibly lucky, just in general for my career, to be able to do this for a living. But I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to be that close and have that proximity and that window into a truly remarkable collection of dudes. Like there's nothing that will be like that. I don't think. I don't expect to ever cover that again. I covered the Seahawks when they went to the Super Bowl in 2005. And it was really cool, and people were excited, and there's a devoted fan base to the Seahawks. But when they went to the Super Bowl in 2013, it was different, and it was different because the way that team resonated, it across the league, but especially in the city. My wife was working; she's also a journalist, but she was working at the Seattle Times. She was part of the editorial board, their op-ed section, and that year they went to the Super Bowl. She wrote. It was an op-ed about how she was channeling the spirit of Sherman, and that Seattle was too laid back and they needed more braggadocious. They needed more swagger. So she was calling out, there was the tunnel being built in there. Like, I'm calling you out, Big Bertha. Like, you're a mediocre drill getting broke down in the tunnel. And that way that they resonated, it's very unique and really, really cool.
it resonated around the world because I flew out to Seattle to be there for the Super Bowl. I booked flights the previous October thinking this team's going to be there. And I promised myself that one day I'll get to thank Rich Sherman publicly, properly face to face, because he saved my whole trip. It was 4 a.m. He saved my whole trip. It was 4 a.m. in the morning when he made the trip. I was running around my house doing the silent scream you do when you're trying not to wake anyone up. And, it was intoxicating. And it doesn't feel like it's quite there yet. And I guess you always hope that it does. But what Stuart and I said, we started the podcast, I think 3 or 4 years ago, is that if it does get to a point of being there, you have to enjoy it, because unfortunately it goes so much quicker than it comes. And I wish I'd enjoyed it a little bit more than I did. And I loved it.
Yeah.
But over this last few minutes, just to fill time down, we've done a rewatch of, I think we did 7 games from that season, and it was just, especially watching Marshawn Lynch, it was incredible. It was so much fun to just watch him run and just see that it was a different. Everything was at a different speed to what we've seen the last couple of years, and then you just Walter Thurman was making plays, Byron Maxwell was making plays, Red Bryant, Brandon Meebane, Clinton McDonald, and it was just like, you kind of forget 7 years down the line that it was a ridiculous group, and I enjoyed just reliving it. So it must be really cool to live through.
You talk about it in the moments and the images and the memories of that season, because you talked about it. I think it's one of my favorite plays of Marshawn Lynch's, and I think it's the week 2 game against San Francisco that year, because they played the opening week at Carolina, which was a pretty closely played game, and I think there was a fumble late that the Seahawks forced to clinch it.
I think Jermaine Kerr scored
the touchdown.
Yes, yeah. And then the next week, it's kind of this low scoring, and I think there was a lightning delay in the first half. Marshawn Lynch,
not appreciated at a 1:25 a.m. kickoff, by the way. We don't like those. We don't like overtime in prime time. We don't like lightning delays in prime time. So make sure that never happens again, please.
6-6.
And Sherman gets that, or I'm sorry, Marshawn Lynch scores that touchdown, and he kind of just barely steps across the end zone, and then he just drops the football like this mic drop, and it was just so defiant. I was like, that might be the coolest celebration I've ever seen. It was disdainful the way he looked over at the Niners. It was awesome. Oh,
yeah, it was so cool. Obviously the one thing, obviously during this COVID time that obviously basically brought you into this Zoom call was your article you wrote a few weeks ago on your enjoyment and is it bewilderment of the whole relegation promotion?
No, I love relegation. Yeah. So I've always been aware of it, and I like soccer. I like making fun of soccer more in the United States, which makes it a little so I'm kind of phony in that way. I didn't realize how avidly people follow relegation. That relegation almost becomes as interesting as, or it's not as interesting as who qualifies for Champions League, but it's the way you follow it. And this past weekend, following it to see who was going to get sent down, because one of the 3 teams was going to survive: Aston Villa, Watford, and Bournemouth. I love relegation.
So about 20 minutes before we jumped on with you, Fulham got promoted, and
they did.
Yeah, it's dubbed as the richest game in. Is it sport or it's definitely football? It's worth £150 million.
Yeah. So Brentford, who are the team that they beat, they've been in existence since 1899. But had they won the game tonight, they would have received more turnover in one evening than in the previous 121 years combined. So that's how important promotion relegation are. And it is something funny because you do hate to see these teams tanking to get the first pick. And the worst, even having, I can't imagine, God forbid this ever happens to the Seahawks, that we're sat here in August thinking it's very important that we don't win many games this year so that our next year's draft pick. I can't think of anything worse. And so, yeah, I mean, relegation is something that we've grown up with. Unfortunately, Stuart's lived through it a couple of times with his team. I'm fortunate that we've never. I support Tottenham. Have never not been relegated in my life, but Stuart supports Coventry, who are thankfully on the rise again. But they've been relegated probably 3 or 4 times in his life from different divisions, and it sucks.
Yeah,
So
I've been trying to follow it. So Leeds is coming up, right? And they've been down for like 15 years, and I was interested in them. But then I found out the 49ers own part of them.
Yeah.
I can't you can't root for a team that the 49ers own part of.
You wouldn't want to root for Leeds anyway, to be quite honest with you.
Oh, really?
They're known as dirty Leeds for a reason. They're kind of the Raiders of football, I would say.
That's funny because I read what's the book, The Damn United by David Pierce, which is about, is it Cluey? How do you guys, is it Clough? Cloughie. Oh, Brian Clough.
It's a film as well with
Martin Sheen.
Michael Sheen. Who,
the non-Jed Bartlett Sheen.
Yeah, which is really good. But so I've been following my team since 1993, and they've relegated 3 times. And before I was born, my dad never saw us got relegated, and they've been relegated 3 times since he started taking me. So it's not like the things that Adam moans about watching his team are universes apart from what I moan about watching my team.
It's fascinating to me. So how does a team like Leeds, which seems like it was very well funded, but they went into too much debt, and then because there's a whole phrase, right? Pulling leads, like where you get overextended and then you like basically just start plummeting. Like that's fascinating to me.
Whenever like any team looks to spend some money, they're like, well, you don't want to do a Leeds. So, I mean, Leeds were effectively paying like Jermaine Ifedi $17 million a year. That's what they were doing. And they were doing it for 20 or 23 players in a time where there was a lot less financial muscle in the game. I mean, now, unfortunately, teams are owned by countries, and actually the sport is a bit stupid as a result. But when it was a guy that owns a team and they were spending, £50,000 a week, which is a lot of money now, but it was an awful lot of money in 2001 on players, Joey Hunt. You're not going to want to do that. And so, doing a Leeds, and they've only just recovered from it now. But apparently you're looking for a team.
I am. Yeah. So I went and saw it. I've seen 2 Premier League matches, Queen's Park Rangers and West Ham. And then the other one, I only saw part of it. It was West Ham. It was West Ham as well. Mm-hmm. I need a team. And I've tried this before, and it's always hard because so many American writers root for Arsenal. And I don't understand. Arsenal. Why is Arsenal? Is it because of the Nick Hornby book that all these American writers have decided to be Arsenal fans?
Quite possibly. Or maybe just kind of mental illness. That could be it.
But I think I tweeted you, Danny. I think a lot of Seattle media appear to be Spurs fans, which is quite.
They do.
A couple of people at my station are Spurs fans. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, I don't know if it's Yedlin related, but Lydia Cruz and Stacey Ross are both Spurs fans.
So I think I was in a tweet chain with them from Amsterdam when Spurs got to the Champions League final, because I'm friendly with Kevin Shockey from the other station and Jackson from the other station, who are also Spurs fans. And we had a little chat, and Mina Kimes and her brother, who I'm very friendly with, are all Spurs fans. Now, for the good of your life going forward, I can strongly advise you against joining us, but you'd be so welcome. We'd love to have you. But honestly, if you want to smile for another day in your life, choose anyone else, because there's no joy over here, sadly.
You can't, because there's certain teams you can't root for, right? Like Chelsea is too well funded because they've got like the Russian oil oligarch.
Yeah.
Manchester United is completely out because they're the Yankees.
Yeah.
Liverpool is now completely played out because that would be a bandwagon selection.
And Boston as well.
And they're Red Sox as well.
Oh, no kid. Yeah. No. And then the Glaziers, it's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that own Man United.
Yeah. Man City is Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
And Arsenal are owned by Stan Kroenke of the LA Rams.
Yes.
So just another reason just to avoid that hellhole. Look, we'd love to have you.
Okay.
And have you been? So you've been over to the UK a couple of times.
Couple of times. Yes, but I look to go forward. I'm hoping to go more frequently now. I love London.
There's a Spurs ticket waiting for you at any game you want to come to, because we've got plenty of season tickets, and you're welcome to come and suffer in silence or in loudness with us anytime you want.
I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Should we have a quick spin, Adam?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So, Danny, we do a thing every week where it's called Get in the Bin, where it's just someone who's really, really irritated us or annoyed us or been a bit dumb and stupid. After reading what you wrote a couple of days ago, I'm pretty certain who I know you're going to put in your bin. But like, so for me, for us, well, this started when Hugh Jackson was he at Cleveland when we started doing this?
Yeah, that's when it started.
He's got residency. Colin Cowherd's got residency.
Cowherd has a timeshare.
To be fair, not even NFL opinions, just general opinions. So we just, Adam, do you want to kick us off with?
Yeah, I'm going to actually do a controversial anti-bin. So normally Skip Bayless would be well in the bin for his just outlandish ridiculousness. And him leading off a show with talking about why LeBron James's beard is going grey in a time of a global pandemic, that would normally be as bin-worthy as ever. But I have to say, in the midst of a global pandemic with 5 months of no sport, how refreshing to have that idiot back on TV, giving us a shred of normalcy, slagging off LeBron James for having a few grey tufts in his beard. So yeah, Skip Bayless is not going in the bin. In me placing him in the bin, if that makes sense, Stu.
Just by his mere reappearance and presence.
Just being there, it's kind of it's almost like a home comfort having Skip back talking shite on TV.
I mean, I think mine would be who, Danny, you wrote about a couple of days ago, so I'll leave the floor for you.
Oh, Boomer Esiason. Yeah, Boomer made me mad. Yeah, he talked about Jamal Adams, and it's a well-tread sort of habit when a player leaves one team for another. The team that he's departing from then takes an entire 4 or 5 days to completely slag that player, right? Like it's what a pain. And we've seen it to some extent with Sherman when he's left, and everybody kind of like, okay, it's time to get your shots in on the way out. So there's part of that that's normal for Jamal Adams. Boomer Esiason, and maybe he said, I don't know if Jamal Adams is bipolar, and then described that whatever he did was a complete disgrace. And it's a special kind of like lameness to talk about someone's mental health. And the fact that Boomer Esiason is not a psychologist, yet this is the third time in 5 years he's wondered if such and such player is bipolar. And then I was like, look, I don't think it's cool to do that to begin with, but what exactly did Jamal Adams do that you would define as potentially fitting your sort of armchair diagnosis, that he decided he wanted to be traded from a demonstrably bad team that wasn't giving him the raise he wanted, and he sought to get traded? Like, that actually seems extremely rational. And when he wasn't getting what he wanted, he then proceeded to criticize his boss in public, which should be everyone's dream. Like, if you could go on like, hey, I'd like to tell you that I think the guy in charge of this team, the coach with the bug eyes, Adam Gase, I think he's terrible. I don't think he should be the coach, and I don't think we're going anywhere with him. If you could go ahead and print that, I'd appreciate it. No, you're right. They probably won't like it, but if they trade me, then I'm getting what I want. Thank you. Click, and then get traded? Like, it's the ultimate power play. And instead, Boomer's like, oh, I think that he might be bipolar. So, yeah, Boomer gets thrown in the bin.
I love it. Just to think, if he just put a full stop after, I don't know if Jamal Adams is bipolar, full stop, he could have saved all of the bin. He wouldn't have been in. He could have saved articles, but he would have stayed out of the bin. And I'm sure he's going to be deeply offended to, people are going to tell him. There's no, we have 3 listeners. We have 3 listeners. He's going to find out. He's going to find out.
Yeah, the only one that can go in my bin is my local city council for a multitude of reasons, but never mind. That's a different podcast and a different subject, Adam. One more thing on relationships, and obviously on your breakfast radio show, Danny, with is it Paul?
Paul Gallant.
Paul Gallant, yeah. We have a regular guest as one of your producers. Jessamine McIntyre has been on the show twice. She looked after me last October, and I recorded our 100th episode in one of your studios at 710. So,
that's awesome.
Next time you see her, just make sure you give her a tray of mortadella ham, Adam.
Yeah, mortadella. We always do like a least favorite meat with our American guests, which you're not avoiding the question, Danny. I'm just softening you up. Don't worry. And mortadella was Jessamine's. So don't give her any, especially the stuff studded with olives. She hates that.
That's right.
But she obviously was over covering the team for the Oakland.
Yeah.
Game, had a great time, and so we became friends there because we're quite friendly with Michael Shondugar from the Athletic, and so we were hanging out. And I mean, if there's one thing that, yeah, Stuart and I always say this, the amount of friends we've been able to make just from following the same stupid sports team 5,000 miles away is testament to, you know, why sports is such a great thing. Forget, you know, what happens on the field is almost inconsequential, depending on, you know, based on the life memories and friends you can make on the way, which is fantastic.
It's absolutely great. And I love these sort of things. And it's been a pleasure to meet you guys. Really, really cool.
Adam, do you want to ask the food question?
The what question?
The food question.
Well, yeah, I mean, least favorite meat. Yeah, we have to know. The people need to know.
See, I like pretty much everything. I would say that the least favorite thing that I've eaten was, there was a toad when I was in China with my in-laws. And so both of my wife was born in Southern California, but her parents emigrated from Hong Kong. And so when I've traveled with them, and one of my habits has been that I eat anything that's put in front of me. Like I will, there's nothing that I'm going to turn down. So like in Hong Kong, I've eaten chicken speed, I've eaten snake, I've eaten bugs at the street market in Beijing. Like there's nothing I'm not going to eat. And there was one time we got a stir-fried toad. And the toad, I saw them carry the toad. And so it was like this little fat toad that they came and got and like carried it upstairs. And like when I ate it, I was like, okay, this is nasty.
It's a real shame we didn't jump the stairs just to continue.
I know. Like the whole thing. So if you were going to ask me, that's the one thing. Yeah, toads. And I think you can throw frog legs in there too.
What did it taste like?
It was kind of rubbery. Like that's the best way that I could describe it, because everybody will say like, oh, it tasted like chicken, but it was too chewy. It was the texture that got me, and I was just like, oh yeah. So, and I think the visual didn't help.
Yeah.
I mean, I would suggest just go for like turkey as your least favorite, but you've gone like way out there with the frog. So I'm so happy with the answer. It's been great. It's been great.
Yeah, it's a bit different from Marjorie Harper saying coconut, I guess, isn't it, as well?
Coconut's delicious.
Oh, yeah.
I know. You can't get the staff these days.
No, we had a NFL. At the Raiders now. He's an undrafted guy, and he said his least favorite food was coconut.
Oh, wow.
That's
Crazy
person.
Maybe that's why he went and drafted. Who knows?
Yeah, it could be.
Yeah. So where can people follow you and read all your stuff? And obviously, I think we can listen to the show via
via podcast.
Yeah, you can get it on podcast. There's an app, the 710 Sports app, or you can do that online at 710 Sports, and you can follow me on Twitter at Danny O'Neill, DANNYONEIL. And yeah, this is great. It was really fun to talk to you guys.
Great. Cool. Well, thanks so much for I'm sure you could have done so many more interesting things, like eat your pizza and play with your dog. Ended up with us idiots, but we massively appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you guys.
Thanks, Danny.